Angelique L'Amour was born in Los Angeles, California. The daughter of author Louis L'Amour, she grew up in the household of a prolific writer where writing and storytelling were a way of life. Angelique has spent 20 years as a freelance editor, working on academic papers, novels, film projects, as well as writing content for 2 websites. She also created and taught a creative writing program and has begun to release that as an online course. As a wife, mother of 2, and a breast cancer survivor, Angelique is currently hard at work getting back to her passion for fiction. Now, speaking of growing up in the house of a prolific writer, now you grew up surrounded by books and stories. In fact, on your website, I was reading that you recall breakfast time being a time when discussions of history, poetry, and politics were common. Was this something that you relished as a child, or did you find it strange?
We used to race through breakfast because the person who got done first could stand over Dad's left hand, and he always had the book on his left side. Yeah. So he'd have his book open, and then he'd point to where he was on the page, and that's how we learned to read. Mom read to us like all the kid stuff, all the Dr. Seuss and all that kind of thing, and Dad was reading, histories and biographies and sometimes fiction that he felt we should be exposed to. Mm-hmm. So for us, it was normal to have that. We had a lot of time with our dad. We were very, very, very lucky because he worked at home. He wasn't going to an office and commuting and doing all of that. He was just there. So we had kind of a great time, but we also had a very large vocabulary, very young. Mm-hmm. And read at a very high level very early. Mm-hmm. As a result of just being constantly exposed to books, constantly he was reading aloud, he was writing. We had, 8,000 or 9,000 books in our house when we lived in the little house that I was born into, and then we moved to a bigger house, and about 20,000 in that house. I don't know for sure. It might be 15, it might be 10, but it's just, there's books everywhere.
Right.
And it's, the room behind me over here, I'm trying to find my on camera, behind that shoulder, is our, what we call formal living room. That is, my husband and I just bookshelved it. So, we have our TV and our dining and all in the other room, and the library is our front room of our house. But we still have books everywhere.
That's awesome.
We have books upstairs. Girls have books, and we're readers.
That's awesome. So even your family vacations were places where your father's stories were based. Now, did you ever just want to go to a water park, or did you love the outdoors and history as much as your father did?
Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag. So normal life was get in a car, drive to the middle of nowhere, and walk around. We also went to Ireland and England, and we went to the Gaspé Peninsula, drove around the Gaspé Peninsula in Canada. And we did that when I was, I think, 7. And so the trips were patterned around 2 things. It was research and it was publicity. So he would do, wherever we went, he would try to do book signings, and he would get on local news, and he would do interviews and things like that. But a lot of times, and sometimes that was the driving force behind the trip, and sometimes it was, where did he need to go next? What did he need to visit or revisit? And I guess when I got to be 12, I started 7th grade at a very hoity-toity school. That was my choice. It was my choice to go to a private school, and it was a private all-girls school that my mother had gone to, and people weren't doing what we were doing. 7th grade teacher, English teacher, who hated me with a passion, went around the classroom the first week of school and asked everybody to introduce themselves and say what their father did for a living. I didn't think this was weird because I had kind of grown up with a certain amount of interviewing going on, and we had just done 60 Minutes the year before. So okay, whatever. And she got to me, and she's like, and you are? And I'm like, I'm Angelique L'Amour. My dad's an author. And she's like, well, what else does he do? And I'm like, well, He works out every day at 3 o'clock, and he punches a heavy bag, and he skips rope. And she looked at me like I was just crazy. And I went home at night, and I said, Dad, like, why did she think that was so weird? And he said, oh, honey, I was 12. He said,
Right.
most people don't make a living as a writer. I said, oh, okay. But it hadn't occurred to me. And our life was very modest.
Mm-hmm.
Our house that we lived in until I was 9 was not, 2,200 square feet. It was small, modest house on a tiny lot above the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. And then we moved to Westwood, and we had a much bigger house, but we had one car because my dad didn't drive, and we went to the middle of nowhere on a regular basis.
Right.
And so when I was at that school at Westlake, which is now Harvard Westlake, I found myself with all these girls who rode English. I'd never been in an English saddle. I'd never seen an English saddle. And the horses I tended to ride tended to run away with me because they were never ridden by anybody. And my mother could ride anything. And so they were going places like Hawaii, and they were going to Europe, and they were doing all this stuff. And I was like, okay. And then we went to Hawaii, spring break of my 7th grade year. I was 7th grade. And we went to, stayed at the Kahala Hilton because Dad was speaking to the English Teachers of America who were having their event on Oahu. But I had like this normal vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really excited about this idea of like going to a beach and getting to like go in the water and just hang for more than a day and have this sort of normal experience. And, and that was really kind of wonderful. But most of the time we were hiking and out in the middle of nowhere.
Do you have?
And it was wonderful. It was, I would never give up those experiences for anything.
Right. I was going to ask if you had a different perspective of it now, looking back, than perhaps you did at the time.
Anything. It sounds so silly. Okay, so I had a flawless childhood. So my parents loved each other. They loved us. My brother and I fought like cats and dogs when we were younger, but we were also thrown together constantly. Bo and I never went to summer camp. So when we spent time in the back of a car driving to the middle of nowhere, and we spent time in motels all over the US. And we were always sharing a room, and we didn't have to share a room at home, which was great. But, so we had very almost Donna Reed-like childhood, except that Dad was he was older, and he was very calm, and he was fascinating. So anything that he thought was a good idea was a good idea. Right, it always ended up being, it was always like kind of really interesting. I mean, I do remember one trip we took when I was, I don't know, probably 10 or 11, and we left Durango, Colorado, and we drove up to Wyoming. We drove east across Colorado. We drove up into Wyoming, and that was a lot of very long days in the car. And I remember, taking a Dramamine and reading my book for a lot of it, because it was just hours of just empty prairie.
Sure.
But also during those times, Dad would sometimes read aloud, and so that was cool. And we both can read a map really well. We can navigate our way around the world with no problem and no internet if we need to. So, it ended up being, I don't remember ever being bored, and I never remember, there was never really a room for a complaint because it was just what we did.
Right.
Right.
As we got older, our lives got busier, but we still traveled. My brother, I think the year he was 17, he spent the summer in Colorado working on the Shalako property, and so he worked, digging post holes and riding fence and doing all of that. And that's kind of around the time he stopped traveling with great regularity with Mom and Dad and me. But we still managed to take a trip a year, if not more. you know.
Yeah.
They just started as we started to drive, they started to do more things, just the two of them. But yeah, we had a pretty awesome childhood.
It sounds like.
You know, I was like, when I have this, you know, book of quotes from my dad's work, and when it came out in '88, I think it was Bing Crosby's son had written this tell-all, and it was not flattering to.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
And when they were trying to get me interviews, they kept saying, well, you know, she's done this book and it's this collection of quotes from 27 of her dad's novels. And it was like this. And they're like, yeah, but what's wrong with their relationship?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I'm like, and they were saying, we're having a devil of a time because people only want the bad stuff. And you sitting there saying dad was awesome is really
kind of boring, Angelique.
you know? So, I mean, I can tell you, like, we went that trip to Wyoming. You know, we went off the side of a cliff in a truck on purpose, being driven by an 11-year-old boy who, it was like, he came to pick us. We went to, okay. My dad wanted to see this cave on this ranch where they had found a skeleton of a mountain man with a very, very, very old rifle. And somehow he had found out about this and he wanted to see it. And of course they were thrilled to have him. A working ranch in Wyoming. And so we didn't have a 4-wheel drive that we were traveling around in. We were traveling around a station wagon. So the guy who owned the ranch sent his son to pick us up at the gate. And his son was my age. And I was 10 or 11. Okay. And he's got one of those giant pickup trucks with the 2 seats, front and back, you know. And my mother and Bo get in the back with this kid's dog. And I'm sitting in between the kid and my dad. And so we're going along and the windows are down and it's hot as heck. And every time brush comes in, the dog leaps to the side of the car that the brush comes in, grabs the hold of the brush, holds onto it until his head hits the back of the window. And so it does on the other side. And then we get to this point and he goes, I got to tell you, the road's washed out here, so I have to go around. And we start, and we're going off the edge of the mountain. They were literally like suspended in midair before there's this ka-chunk as the wheels go down, and we go straight down this really steep hill. And I had been on all sorts of really bad 4-wheel drive roads with my mother driving Champ. But I was sitting there going, Dad. It's like you can't see anything, you know. And so there are moments like that I remember, but they're just funny instead of you know anything
dark
terrifying.
And tragic, right?
Not a bad guy, you know. And so that's what I can say is it was fascinating, and we met a lot of interesting people. We traveled to a lot of places that I probably could not find again without a lot of help from my brother, and you know, but it was awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know whether to be jealous of such a nice childhood or feel bad for the non-marketability of it for you. You know?
I got given grace because Larry King said, I want to interview both of them, and all of a sudden, the PR people at what was then Bantam Doubleday Dell and is now Penguin Random House were like, oh, well, she's doing Larry King in June, so could she come see you in May? And they had this, and the minute anybody heard the name Larry King, it was like instantaneously you became something important, and the value became there. So I have thanked him since. I ran into him years later. I did do the interview, and I ran into him years later, and I said, I just have to thank you because you made my book tour happen by saying, I want you guys. And he only ended up with me because my father passed away, but he was gracious and had me on. So
pretty cool.
Yeah, speaking of that book, I distinctly remember checking that out of my local library and just once again being astounded by the depth of your father's work. And you know, I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves for being a thinker that he was. Do you think that's because of his genre, or why? Or why is that, you think?
I think that I'm going to say this. There would never have been an opportunity, and I do believe this, because I think Dad changed the face of Westerns.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not think that Larry McMurtry's Western would have had the opportunity to win the Pulitzer Prize, no matter how fabulous the book is, if it wasn't for the 30 years before
Mm-hmm.
of Dad eking his way, convincing people that the Western was not dime store material. And
Right.
at the time when I was a little kid, Westerns weren't published in hardback.
Right.
And Westerns were unimportant. And Dad used to say, it's great. They think that two people in bed in New York is more important than the opening up of an entire continent.
Right.
Like
That's right.
history began with westward movement from Plymouth Rock, from England. It began with Western movement. So I think he kept pushing it. And before he hit the New York Times bestseller list, he had to have a hardback Western. And before he hit the New York Times bestseller list, he'd already sold 55 million copies.
Right.
He'd already outsold most of the books on the list with great regularity.
Mm-hmm.
So it took time, and it took perseverance, and it took him writing what he wrote. And he wanted to tell the story of people. And he used to say, everybody talks about being reincarnated, and they're always reincarnated, and they were always a prince or a king or a queen or a duchess. And he's like, I think if we're reincarnated, there are people who are farmers and blacksmiths and sailors, and not everybody was royalty. And he really wanted to tell the story of people who were people. Average day.
Well.
Yeah. You're everyman in many respects. And so he started out in the pulp magazines, and he started out writing everything. Mm-hmm. He wrote boxing stories and seafaring stories and stories about people hunting gold and Westerns. And he wrote adventure stories, and he wrote everything he could write. He rewrote the Mother Goose rhymes slightly salaciously. He wrote treatments for TV shows. He wrote everything, because that's what you did. And he was always selling, and he did, detective stories and, all of it. And then what happened was Gift of Cochise got bought. He was asked to expand it into a novel. John Wayne made it into a movie, and all of a sudden he was the guy who wrote Westerns.
Right.
And he had a choice, and he could be the guy who wrote Westerns and ride this train forward until he could get to the point where he could branch out more and more into what he'd always written. And so he wrote Westerns, but he started trying to push the envelope, and he turned in The Walking Drum, which takes place in 1170. The first time he showed it to a publisher, it was like 1974, and they were like, oh, no, we don't want to see that from you. So, he let it sit, and then it came out in, I'm trying to think right now, 86, I think, 85, 85, I think. And so, he started by introducing the Sackets, he got to go back, and he got to sort of go, well, where did they come from? So let's, bring the Sackets over from England, and maybe they won't notice that it's not a Western.
Right.
And we can just keep telling this story. But that takes place in the 1500s. Like, how that's not a Western,
Right.
Yeah.
except it's about that conscious movement of people who are looking for better.
Right.
So, the Trail of Memories quote book came out of a conversation I had with my dad when I was 14. And it took me 10 years until it was published. So I was given an assignment where I was to read 3 books over the summer and pull quotes from them and have them ready for the first day of school. It was the summer before 10th grade. And I was switching schools. Left the hoity-toity one behind. Or there were people who are going to hate me for saying that, but I was
yes, they're all going to be watching our show.
Yeah. That school was not the best fit for me. It goes both ways. I had some really good experiences there, and I really found my love in my life at Marymount High School in Los Angeles. So, so I was moving to Marymount, and I'm like, okay, fine. So I picked up. We were traveling to England, Ireland, and Scotland, and I picked up Fair Blows the Wind because I wanted to read something of Dad's, and I wanted to read something that took place there. And he would, wake me up by knocking on the door of my hotel room and telling me it was Tat and Chantry. And we had this whole thing. I said to him, he said, "What? Tell me about the quote thing." And I said, "Well, I pulled these quotes." And he's like, "Well, what did you pull out of Fair Blows the Wind?" And so I told him, I read him the 3 quotes, and he was like, "Huh." He said, "I have to tell you a story." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, I was speaking at a English teacher's event, and there were 3 of us, 3 authors that were speaking." And he said, the man got up. We didn't know the order. And he got up to speak. And he said, and he started reading quotes. And then he said, "Who do you think wrote these words?" And he said, "I was sitting there going, I don't know who wrote that." And then he was introduced, and he was kind of blown away. And so this idea started to percolate, but it took us a while. And then it took me, I literally had to stop college and finish it because it was an enormous job in the days before real computers.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And pieces of paper, that were like yay big sitting on the floor of my apartment, and I was moving them around in categories. It was, a nightmare. It was a very, very big deal to do. But that's where that came from. And I think it was the first exposure a lot of people had to him just not being the cowboy book guy.
Right.
West author. He really, he would always get letters. He would get letters from single mothers. He would get letters saying, "I'm raising my sons based on the men in your books. I'm giving them your books to read, telling them this is how to be a man. This is how to be a good person." And we'd get people would write in and say, "I never read a book until I read your book." And my brother and my husband and I were in a hat store in Farmington, New Mexico, because I needed to hat. And my brother was like, "There's this great hat store." And I wanted a really big cowboy hat. So we're standing there, and Bo's like, I realized that I had my wallet was sitting back at the house, and I had my purse with nothing in it. My brother's like, I'll buy your hat." I said, "Okay." So he hands the guy who's been helping me the credit card, and he kind of stops for a second. And he's this kind of big guy wearing his very, very perfectly pressed shirt with his very, very good jeans and his, and he's like just really clean cut, classic cowboy, New Mexico, just, very, very nice looking guy. And he just said, he's standing there and he looks at my brother and he goes, "Are you his son?" And Bo goes, "Yeah. And this is his daughter." And tears start to well up in his eyes.
Wow.
He goes, "I never would have finished high school. Never would have finished high school if it wasn't for your dad's books."
Oh, wow.
My teacher gave them to me, and it was the thing that started me reading. And, it's chilling and it's wonderful, but it's oddly enough, there are so many stories that we have heard over the years that are just like that.
Right. Yeah, I want to share a little something with you. I grew up in a very rural community, and the biggest group that people participated in was Future Farmers of America. Okay, that'll give you an idea. But these were some guys that were probably not going to go to college. They were probably going to go right from high school to their family farm or whatever. But you would see them walking around with your dad's books in their hands.
Wow.
And I mean, I've maintained contact with a few of them, and they're not walking around with my books in their hands. So.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Well, that's the way it goes.
It's an interesting thing because then, my husband's stepfather passed away, and we're sitting at the funeral, and it's back east in New Jersey, and I'm sitting at a table with like 3 lawyers that were his contemporaries. So they're older gentlemen in there, and they're lawyers, and they're very East Coast. Find out who I am, and then are like, I need to talk to you. I'm like, this is awesome. And Christopher's going, this is interesting to me because it wasn't like the guy in New Mexico. Now we've got New York lawyers, New Jersey lawyers that are sitting there going, I went to Yale, I went to Princeton, I went to Harvard, and I'm a huge fan.
Right.
And I think I love hearing that, and I love hearing from fans. And there are a lot of women that are huge fans of my dad's, and that's a really common sort of misconception until you meet 6 or 8 of them that are women that are like going, oh my gosh, I've read everything.
That's cool.
Because there's always enough romance. There's always a great looking guy, and there's always an adventure, and it's appealing. I think it's appealing to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It really, that's a perfect summation of it. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you give his work a chance, it's gonna take you someplace cool, Well,
I think a good story is a good story.
Right.
And that's, if you tell the story well, then people are going to read it.
That's what we've been doing wrong, Craig.
I tell the good story well, and you have to grab them in the first sentence. So that's it. It's a secret. First thing you have to figure out how to do the rest of it.
Just doing my prep for tonight was a lot. I think it was just when I Googled your name and the little fact box came up, and it has a lot of your aunts and uncles listed.
Oh,
but they all spell their name more Americanized. Now, are they victims of Ellis Island, or was that a conscious choice?
Actually, it's a really kind of weird story, and I still haven't gotten to the bottom of it. The simple form is that my grandfather spelled it capital L, little a, capital Moore. Simple form. His father spelled it that way. Also, in certain records of him, it's spelled with a L apostrophe, capital More.
Okay.
And before him, it's just Moore, Moore. So, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out, but they're French Canadian,
right?
And came down into Minnesota and Michigan and that area. And when Dad started writing, he wanted a little more flair. So he went back to the actual correct, if you believe that the name is L'Amour. Okay, so in French, if you've got 2 A's, you take out 1 A and you put in an apostrophe.
Right.
Paul the liaison. So he did it that way, and it's very pretty that way.
Much prettier, yes, I agree.
There are French LAmours in Brittany, where our family comes from, that spell it that way. They may not use the apostrophe in the capital, but they definitely are LAMOUR. But it's like we went from Brittany to Scotland to Northern Ireland to America and Canada. So it's like not Ellis Island because it's way before that.
Right.
So it's just this sort of, as you go back across. So he went back to the French classic spelling of the name because it seems like there was an L in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I have a lot more information than he did about the LAmours and the Moors simply because of Ancestry.com and being able to Google search things and find, where everybody was born. So he had a lot of family history in his head, but, and that was a constant disagreement between him and his eldest sister, Edna. She was very insulted by him changing the spelling of the name.
Oh, no.
And she was 14 or 15 when he was born, so she always felt that she was the authority on everything. And I don't believe there's anybody who ever knew her, including her own son, who ever thought that she didn't feel that she was the absolute authority. Very smart, graduated from college in 1920. Very smart woman. So, everybody in between them passed away by 1954.
Wow.
And the two of them, the oldest and the youngest, went on into, my aunt lived to be 107.
Wow.
Incredible.
So, yeah.
So, and take a little left turn here, I guess. You also spent some time in the film industry. Was this something that you enjoyed?
Loved it.
Did you love
Not
it?
film so much. No, I mean, I did film, but I mean, I was an actress. I was a performer. I loved being on stage. I loved live audience in particular. That was really where I did the most, and I had a blast doing it. But I always wrote. I was always writing. I was writing songs, and I was writing short stories, and I thought about writing plays, but I never really did it. I got really frustrated because I kept auditioning for Night Court and not getting chosen. I mean, like they had me in for 3 different parts, and they would have me in multiple times. And finally, I sat down and actually wrote myself my own 3-part episode, 3-episode, but didn't manage to sell it to them. But I did dabble in screenwriting. But for me, I was always writing something. So as much as I loved being on stage and as much as that was just a wonderful outlet, by the time I hit 30, I was aging out of Los Angeles, and I kind of had 2 choices. And one was move to New York, which my husband really didn't want to do, and I really didn't really want to do. Or just go ahead and have a family, because I'd married this amazing guy when I was 26. And at that time, LA skewed very young. And I mean, if you talk to anybody who's my contemporary, Julia Roberts and Nicole Kidman and all of them, we all know what used to happen is that if you didn't get started by the age of 18, and even if you did, you had this desert period in your 30s and 40s. They're not having that, but the whole world changed.
Right.
Yeah.
But at that time, TV was king in Los Angeles, and I was not booking, and I'm 5'10", does not help to be a tall actress.
Right.
And so, it was kind of like Christopher kind of looked at me one day and said, what if every fear in your life was taken away? What would you do? And I kind of went, what? And he said, no, what if every fear in your life was taken away? What would you do? And I said, have a baby. And he said, well, that's my thought too. And I was like, okay, well, let's get going with this family thing, because I have this amazing relationship. And one of my dear friends from the age of 9 said to me, you should just write those books like you were reading all the time, all those little mystery books that you were reading when we were growing up. And so I started writing. And I sat in acting class, and I was waiting. They were moving furniture around and setting up for the next scene that was going to be done. And I just thought, how many books have I thought about writing that I haven't even, I haven't written, but I've thought about writing? And I came up with something like, I don't know, 23 or 17 or some astronomical, ridiculous number. And I thought, maybe it's time.
Right.
Maybe that's what's telling me. So I quit acting, and I had 3 auditions in that first year. Where I knew absolutely everybody, had every connection in the world, did amazing auditions, felt really good about everything, didn't get anything. I've quit, and I was like, I'm done. And people are asking me. So I went, but I was kind of like, I wasn't pregnant yet, but, we were hoping. And I was just like, okay, whatever, I'll go on it and see what happens. And I thought, okay, so thank you, God, you gave me this moment to be really clear that I know I'm at the top of my game. Like, my craft is strong. I know what I'm doing. I get called back on everything. But, I was walking into auditions and losing them because I was 5'10". I was walking in on auditions and losing them because of whatever, because, they could get somebody who had oodles of credit. It just was, I was like, it's time. It's just time to go have life and see what happens, But my grandmother was an actress in the silence. My mother was an actress in the 50s. I was an actress in the 80s and 90s. And, our oldest is in New York acting. So, it's just, you have two family crafts. One is acting and one is writing.
Yep.
So that's, we're the cobbler kids here. Just
All
no
right.
doubt.
I can't let you get away without asking on behalf of my wife, is Sam Elliott as dreamy in person as he is on screen?
Sam Elliott is a lovely man. He is a lovely, lovely man. And I was really, really lucky to meet him and Tom Selleck when I was 14, and then to work with them when I was 18 on my very first movie, and then to work with Sam again right before I got married. And they're both really lovely people. Their wives are terrific. They're just a really, I run into Sam every once in a while, and I see Catherine every once in a while. And it's just always wonderful, very giving people.
Yeah.
And yes, he have a voice that's that deep.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I actually saw an interview with him very recently. I think he was on the CBS morning show recently, and he just comes off as being a great, great guy. He really does.
He's really laid back, and he's really generous. People who have been in the business for a long time and been as successful as Sam and been as successful as Tom are they're very generous performers, and they're generous people they're gracious. And Sam is like that. Like it just really nice. And Catherine is just lovely. So
yeah, it's great to hear that, somebody is as their persona seen,
Yes.
That's refreshing.
Yeah.
That's really good to hear.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's talk about your writing a little bit more, and I'm going to have Scott lead us into that.
Actually, the question I had was more about your teaching creative writing. Your website says that you taught students from 8 to 80. Is there one thing in that age group, which is a pretty wide age group, that you found was the area you needed to address most often with writers? Is there one thing that you helped a lot of writers overcome?
I would say that there are sort of maybe three things that stick out. Well, one is confidence. And the idea of just getting it on the paper, whatever it is, just get it on the paper. The other is what I feel the strongest and the most confident at teaching is creating characters. That's my thing. But I mean, I've done it on paper and I've done it as an actress. So to me, it's gold, and I love it. And we do not bond with the events in a story. We bond with the people and how they deal with it. It is why Lin-Manuel Miranda made a whole generation of kids care about the beginning of the Treasury, right? Because he made Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton into people that they could understand. And the focus is on that. So for me, it's and to not be afraid to just sort of dive in. And when I say the 8 to 80 thing is I was given a lot of latitude. I was asked to teach creative writing to sixth graders. And it was a volunteer job. This is how this all started. And I was really excited to do it. And I was given total freedom in how I created this class, but it was a year-long class. And oddly enough, ended up being the year I was dealing with cancer. But it was kind of great because I was really excited every day. Even if I felt lousy, I was excited about teaching these kids. And so when I started working the summer before, and before I was diagnosed, I started creating this course, and I started realizing that as long as you can write a sentence, you can write a story. So that means that a 7-year-old, 8-year-old who's just learning how to read and just learning how to put sentences together and actually physically write letters and physically write sentences and paragraphs, they can write a story that is satisfying to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true with an adult. The same is true with a 6th grader. And in my 6th grade class, I had kids with learning disabilities. I had kids who never read a book, hated to read. And I had kids who loved to read. I had kids who were total jocks and kids who were very much not. And they all got it. And they all grew. And their stories became bigger and lusher and more interesting. So I think that, my lesson is get it on the paper. And the other thing I would say is if you're going to give it to somebody to read it, what I would always tell the kids is I never used a red pen when I worked with them. So I don't use a red pen. I use purple or something else. But I didn't use it because I wanted them to see it as a collaboration and to realize that, I would say, here's my idea. And I would say this to you if I was working with you. Here's my idea. At the very least, try it and feel free to toss it in the garbage. But try it. Actually physically write what I'm telling you to write and see what happens. Because most beginning writers do what my dad was doing at the beginning, and they write around a story, or they start with a lot of backstory. And I was working with a woman that I know she's writing a memoir about becoming a widow at a very young age, and a widow who watched her husband die being hit by a car on his motorcycle while she was on a motorcycle behind him. And that was it. And she gave me the first 5 pages, and I said, give me the first 5 pages. I'll tell you what I think. You tell me what you think, and we'll see if we're going to work together. And so she gave me the first 5 pages, and I went and met with her, and I said, why am I not reading about the accident? Why am I reading about your marriage? Like, that's fine, but that's not where you begin. Right. You have to begin with that accident. She's like, I can't write that accident. I said, you have to write that accident. Even if it doesn't end up in the book, you have to write it because you have to get that out of you and find out what parts of that are the things that spurred you forward. Being 28 or whatever she was when he passed away. And I said, that is one of those moments in time where time stretches. And you can do that. And you can step away from it in that time stretching. But you have to have that moment. And the fact that you're scared to write it keeps you from writing the whole story. It keeps you from writing the rest of the book because you don't know why you're writing it. Like, you have to know why today, why is this moment happening now? Whether you're writing a memoir or you're writing fiction, you have to know why this moment is making this person do this thing. What is the instigator? And it's true with any story. If you think about the beginning of any story, if it's something that grabs you right away, it's because something is happening that makes today not like any other day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. Cool. That's so good. And I think there's something about writing that is so cathartic, and that has helped me and has helped countless others deal with tragic things that have happened to them. And it's just there's something about getting those words on paper that can, I don't know, maybe make it real to us, because our mind has a way of walling the bad things off, kind of a self-preservation technique. And there's something about breaking through that with the power of language that helps us as human beings to deal with that. And speaking of dark times in your life, now you've accomplished a lot in your life, but I think one of the things that may be your greatest achievement is to have survived the monster of breast cancer. And my own mothers are also a survivor, so I guess I know what it's like to watch that happen and the toll it can have on not only them, but their support system and all of that. How did you keep your spirits up during those days?
Okay, so I'm an optimist to begin with. So there's that. I'm not a pessimist. I would never say I was a pessimist, but it was really interesting. When I go back to this actual, like, the big ticket moment is not finding the lump in my breast. So that was bad.
Mm-hmm.
The big ticket moment is hearing my doctor say over the phone, "You have cancer."
Hmm.
And I stood there and I thought, I said, okay, so what do we do next? And he said, "You come see me on Tuesday." And I said, "Okay, I'll come see you on Tuesday." And he put me on the phone with the secretary and I made the appointment and got off the phone. And the next phone call I made was, well, we first called my girl's godfather, who had survived malignant melanoma at 21. He's now he's like in late 60s, and he's like amazing.
Wow.
And, he wasn't supposed to make it, and he's obviously made it for a long time. So we called him, and then I called the minister who baptized my kids. And she is a religious science minister, and religious science is not Christian science. We believe in doctors. Religious science is this philosophy of positive thinking, that your thoughts create your reality, which, so mind-body connection, it's the secret, it's all of that, is all this, like, we can manifest anything. You have a choice. And I was very aware that I had this choice. I could be positive or I could be negative, and it was my choice. And so I was choosing to be positive, and I said, I need to wrap my mind around this, and I need your help to give me some things to hold on to mentally. And so she said, "You're already healed." I was like, "Okay." "You are unalterably whole." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to hold on to these." And I knew at that moment that by making this choice to be positive, I was given a gift. Okay, so we're going to step back. 6 months before, I was touring Pepperdine University with a bunch of kids on a field trip, and on the wall of one of the science labs was a quote from Swindoll. Didn't know who that was. That was, we're all given a set of oh God, why can't I bring it up? We're given great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as impossible situations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm paraphrasing, and I wrote it down. I didn't even have my phone with me. I'm like scribbling on a piece of paper, borrowing a pencil from one of the science students, and I thought, I have this opportunity to teach my daughters what to do when something really crappy happens. By my thought, deed, and action, by the creation of how I create this family, how I keep this family going, the energy in the house. I have this thing that I can do. And if they get a D on a test, if their boyfriend dumps them the night before prom, if they lose a job they want, if God forbid they ever hear the words I did, they will have a template. Whether they know it or not. They were 7 and 11, and they were girls, and I had very feminine cancer. 2,400 men a year get diagnosed with breast cancer, 240,000 women in the U.S. So, okay, very feminine cancer. Sorry, guys, but it's true. It's just not as common in men.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I have this opportunity, and I am going to make the best of it. I was negative. I was terrified.
Sure.
But I did not indulge it for very long. And my husband used to do this thing that used to drive me crazy. I'd get upset about something before cancer. And he'd say, "Angelique, where are your feet?" And I'd say, "What?" And he'd say, "Where are your feet? Stop your feet." So I'd stop my feet. And he'd say, "Right here, right now, that's all that's going on."
Yeah.
I'm like,
There you go.
So I'm sitting here. We haven't told the girls yet. They're at school. I'm not telling them till I go to the doctor and we know what the plan is, right? Because I need to know what the plan is. I'm having surgery. Am I having chemo? Like, when am I going to tell them? I'm getting my ducks in a row. I'm finding a babysitter because I know I'm going to need the help. And I just got really upset. And I walked into my husband's office and I thought, if he says, "Where are your feet?" And I walked into his office and I said, "I am really, really angry and I am really, really scared." And he looked at me and he said, "You're entitled." And the minute he did that, all of it went away. Like it just went poof. And I thought, this is amazing. This is okay. Like, and he said, we can get through this. As long as we can get through this way through, get through everything, which is one step at a time, one moment at a time, 1 second at a time, one breath at a time, and so right here, right now, everything is fine, and at that moment I had cancer in my body, but we were going to get rid of it.
Right.
That was the first thing we were going to do, So, and I'm also such an Aries, and I like information. So tell me how we're going to do it. Give me a plan. Let me set it up. Let me get it organized, and let me do it, and I will be fine. But under it all, driving it all, was that I did not want to get this all over my kids. Mm-hmm. I did not want them to see it as scary. I did not want them to fear it. I did not want their lives to stop. I did not want the house to become about cancer.
Right.
Didn't want to give it a capital letter. I didn't have a party. I know a lot of women who feel very good about having a party before their mastectomies. Like I was like, just get it over with. But mostly that was because the first date they offered me was October 30th, and I had a 7 and an 11-year-old.
Right.
And I said no. And they're like, okay, how about October 9th? Except that was like in 10 days. So I was, chicken with my head cut off, running back and forth into LA as I live an hour and 10 minutes outside, to having tests, having scans, having blood work, doing everything I had to do so I could have this surgery on the 9th of October. But and we did. We managed to keep their lives going. It was not all about cancer. I was very open. Everybody knew. I wanted the girls to be able to go to and talk to anybody they needed to, but that was very much based on, number one, if you keep a secret in the house with a kid, like you can't. They know whatever it is, right? Number one. Number two, the fastest way to find my kids was for me to go into the bathroom. So like I was never, I had 2 girls. There were 7 and 11. Like if I go into the bathroom, like mom, so, like, they were going to see scars. They were going to see bandages. Like it was just, I was going to lose my hair, and I just could not be bothered with the energy it was going to take to maintain some sort of hidden disease. I couldn't do it. Some people can do it. Hats off. I couldn't. It's not me. And so that's really how I did. And I wrote my blog. I started my blog, and my blog, the very first entry of my blog is that Swindoll quote, because I wrote my way out. I'm, Alexander Hamilton. If I felt upset, I wrote about being positive. If I felt scared, I wrote about being brave. It wasn't that I wasn't. 3:00 in the morning was a really nasty time for me, but I would write, and it would dissipate as I did that. I would reach out and I would help somebody else. I would reach out to someone who would help me. I had a lovely woman come into my life whose kids were about the same age as mine when she was diagnosed, and she just, she was great. She was the person, and she lived in Connecticut. So at 3:00 in the morning, I could actually talk to her. We would email back and forth because she was, it was 6 to her. So it was like normal instead of in the middle of the night when I couldn't do anything except be very, very quiet. So I didn't wake anybody. My dog's here.
Hello.
Somebody's going down the street. It's okay, babe. Not even sure why that's okay. So, so that's how I did it. Yeah. And helping other people. If you told me an hour ago that I have cancer, I still am better off than the person who heard it a minute ago.
Right.
And so I was helping people. I was reaching out to people. I was helping people. I was talking to people, and I was giving back what I was, what was given to me by so many. Boy, you get breast cancer. There are so many amazing women that come up to you, take you into the bathrooms and show you their reconstruction. I mean, I know for you guys, that sounds like a really great thing, but for me, it was like a really great thing. But, it's like, there's just a camaraderie, unfortunately, because there's so many of us. And I was very blessed.
Yeah. Well, and you've built on that because you've went on to become an awareness advocate for those suffering from the disease. You've written a book to go along with those efforts called Chemo, Cupcakes, and Carpools. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
So Chemo, Cupcakes, and Carpools came out of another book I was writing. So I'm working on sort of my spiritual growth, like the idea of why you asked me, how did I keep my attitude? That's in another book. And I was trying to put this with all these helpful hints for how to get from Monday to Sunday as a mom or a parent, mom or dad, with cancer. And it made it clunky. It wasn't the spiritual side of it was just being stopped every every chapter or two by this other information. So I thought, I'm just going to take it apart. Mm-hmm. And nobody I knew had done any self-publishing. So I took this class given by a woman named Kirsten Joy called Kindle in 30. And it taught you how to self-publish a book. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to make this little book that's like 89 pages long that is what I call a nuts and bolts guide to being a parent while going through cancer treatment and surgery. And I put it together and I self-published it. And that is Chemo, Cupcakes, and Carpools. And it was basically came out of a lot of emails that would go from me to other people. It came out of people writing to me. It came from blog posts. It was sort of, how did I manage this? What kind of help did I need? How did I deal with that side effect? How did I deal with, forgetting that I had things on the stove? Because chemo brain is a real thing. Mm-hmm. It's not this joke. I mean, it is a joke. I refer to the days after chemo as having a chemover. I don't like new normal. I just don't. So I have other terminology for that. And for right now, my chemo brain has taken it out of my mind. But it's like chemo normal. I mean, it's like there's a thing that happens. You get so inflamed in your head that you don't remember things. Right. And I would blank out in the middle of a sentence. I would be listening to someone talking to me and I'd be going, I have no idea what they've just said to me. So I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to wait until I catch up again. And I'd listen and I'd nod my head. And it was kind of like when I was dating my first boyfriend, who's a classical pianist, and he'd go on about Brahms and Beethoven and Chopin. And I would just go, because I was just in love. And I learned a lot about classical music, I have to say. But I was like, I didn't know much at the beginning of that relationship. And we're still friends. So, if he watches this, that's the first time he's going to know. Yes. But I would, so I had ways of dealing with things. And, one of them, I wrote everything down. I gave myself visual cues. But all of that's in that book because it's the things that people were asking me. Like, right. How do I remember to do this? How do I do this? How do I keep this straight? How am I going to help my kids deal with it? What do I say to my kids? How do I talk to my kids? And, I have friends, women I know who don't mention it to their children. I have women who've never been seen bald by even their spouses. And that wasn't me. So it is my experience. It's maybe helpful to someone who has metastatic cancer, but I don't know that it is because I don't and I didn't, and I'm grateful. But it is my experience, and that's what that book is, and that's what there's two companion pieces. One is a gratitude journal because I firmly believe that everybody makes too big a deal out of a gratitude journal, and like it has to be this big thing. And I'm like, sometimes it's just about lip balm, right? Or a really nice cup of coffee. Or that your glasses are on your face. Like you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be big ticket items. Right. And the other one is this home organizer, which I wish I'd done, which is, where do my kids need to be and who needs to be where and who's the team parent and who's the class parent and where are their uniforms for soccer and all of that stuff, because we were dealing with 2 soccer teams. And and 2 kids, and thankfully one school at that point. But they're 4 years apart, so that hasn't always been true.
Yeah.
But that's where that came from. And, I just hope it's helpful, and people buy it, and I'm grateful that they do. And, I haven't made my money back yet, but they're like $2 from each sale. But
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that I could get it out, and available, so I can say to people, just go buy the book.
Yeah. No, that's
and
incredible.
it works. I have a friend who's reading it because her husband's going through cancer cancer treatment. Actually, I've had 2 friends who have read it while their spouses were going through cancer treatment, and it has helped them. So
it's amazing. Well, we have kept you about twice as long, I think, as I promised, so I apologize for that. No, you've just been so interesting, I couldn't bear to end it, so I do apologize for running way over the promised time. But I don't want to let you go without asking you if there's anything you're working on right now that you can share with us, something that we can look forward to from you.
You can look forward to, I have 3 projects that are hot right now that I'm working on right now. One is a middle grade mystery, and it was the first thing I ever attempted to write, so I'm working on that. And I have a picture book that don't know anything about writing picture books, but I met a really wonderful illustrator last summer at a conference, Steve Bjorkman, and he gave me the 2-minute lesson in how to write a picture book. And it was great because it really helped me do things. And then he sketched characters for me just for fun, just tossed off a whole bunch of pirates and handed them to me an hour later. And I was like, thank you. Just taking all the guys. And then I have this nonfiction memoir of my sort of spiritual journey through cancer. And that one I have put aside for about a year. And I'm going to go back into it probably in the next couple of months, and then I'm going to send it off to an editor that I've been working with on that. So it's just, it's all in process. I don't know where I'm going, self-publishing or traditional. I may throw things at traditional and see what happens. I'm lucky because I do think I'll get read, but I don't know, you never know if it's good enough to keep your foot in the door.
Right.
So, we'll see. The door will get opened, but then it's, then we have to see if the work stands on its own. But I also may choose to self-publish.
Yeah.
So no, yet. That's my thing. But my main goal and my main focus is really writing for kids at this point.
Awesome.
And I have a historical that's, I keep looking at it. Sitting over there, and it's going, hello. I'm like, yes, no, you're September. So I'm just trying to get these guys up and running and off to people who can give me opinions.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, whatever your route you choose, we'll definitely look forward to those. So Angelique L'Amour, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time.
I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. It's a great chance to have a conversation about writing and books and life.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can keep in touch and chat again at some other time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.